Many people act surprised when I tell them that I have my own YouTube channel, being a psychotherapist. However, when I tell these individuals that my channel focuses on the Urantia Book, the most common response I hear is, how come I haven't heard about this book until now? Coupled with an immediate desire to check out the text free of charge on the Urantia Foundation's website. Unfortunately, for those lucky few that learn about such a text, attempting to conduct an online search for this religious text will bring you headlines of conspiracies, cults, and plagiarism, often discrediting the text before prospecting readers even have a chance to read the forward section that provides a plausible rationale against these accusations. To be honest, some of my own videos use this negativity bias to draw people in. However, many social media online and blog search engines will point out at least several elusive conspiracies that claim to have debunked the Urantia Book and have thusly proven without any reasonable doubt that the roughly 2,000-word text was a masterful hoax associated with creative science fiction, offering only a grueling false narrative to its believers. Grueling in that often the text can be misperceived as being highly technical, and consequently can be at times hard to understand. The text itself was written between the years 1911 and 1934, with the help of a sleeping subject we'll talk about later, with half of the book mysteriously materializing on its own during its final year of conception in 1935. But I should point out the real authors of the Urantia Book are majorly identified by title alone. For the full list of the 23 classifications of entities that assisted making the text, I encourage prospecting readers to go to truthbook.com under Who Wrote the Urantia Book to get a detailed response. Today, we give a brief history and background of the Urantia Book as an attempt to reconcile the aforementioned criticisms under an objective lens. We begin this story with William S. Sadler and his wife, Lena Sadler, who were both prominent physicians of the early 20th century, located in Chicago, Illinois, and were majorly respected throughout their respective professional fields of psychiatry and physiologic therapeutics. Throughout his illustrious career, William had created 11 known published works between the years 1909 to 1952 that was previous to the actual publication of the Urantia Book in 1955. Many who believe in the Urantia Book passionately argue that William stumbling upon the celestial agents who created the text was no accident. Most who know the history of the Urantia papers cite that the only special thing surrounding the sleeping subject is that they housed an experienced thought adjuster or fractal of God that had a previous assignment prior to their current host, and hence had more abilities than a normal adjuster. Suffice it to say in this survey video that according to the Urantia text, that we all, since the outpouring of the Spirit of Truth, are endowed with their own adjuster since the age of moral decision-making, which is roughly just before a child's 6th birthday. However, does such a spark of God actually exist? Or is it just a wild fantasy from a clever individual attempting to sell false hope to the masses? In order to investigate the Sadlers, we must first identify William's early works prior to 1911. Looking at his first published work in 1909, we came across Soul-Winning Texts, or Bible Helps for Professional Work. The publisher even identifies this work as little known to most people even familiar with the Sadlers and the Urantia papers. This first published text offers a strict then adherence to the teachings of Ellen G. White, who was the first prophetical force behind the Seventh-day Adventist Church during this time period. Though the soul-winning text is not doctrinally associated with the Urantia Book, it does offer a glimpse into the Sadlers' early spiritual mindset that often directly contrasts with the Urantia Book. However, there were several similarities between Sadler, White, and the Urantia Book, thoughtfully pointed out by the publisher in its forward section, for those of you intrigued by such a potential overlap. Some broad notable similarities include Dr. Sadler's commitment to personal spiritual outreach, His reverence for Jesus and his desire to share universal truth likely carried over and transformed and expanded into the creation of the Urantia Book. At the very least, such an overlapping mindset likely resonated with the spiritual partners who helped author the Urantia papers and took special interest in Dr. Sadler. Contrastingly, the text clearly and publicly showcased an early devout belief in the sanctity of the Old Testament religious doctrines and stories such as the Great Flood, Christ dying for our sins, Satan directly influencing others, and so on. However, when it comes to my guess associated with what resonated with these celestial agents towards the psychiatrist was likely the humble call to active personal service beginning on page 1. On page 3, we learn,
show sympathy for souls. Don't let them feel that you regard yourself as far superior to them and that you sort of look down on them in pity.
For the true Urantian, it has been my experience that many will take the Urantia Book literally, seeing the merits in many of the world's religions, refraining from the contempt or indignation that some of the other more established religions might exhibit to such New Age religious mindsets. As early as 1911, the Sadlers were said to have been approached by an unidentified neighbor who was concerned because she would occasionally find her husband in a deep, unexplainable sleep, accompanied by abnormal breathing, being unable to rouse him during these times. The Sadlers came to document these episodes, and over time, the individual produced verbal communications that claimed to be from a student visitor of spiritual beings. This changed sometime in 1925, with a voluminous handwritten document materializing by unidentified methods, which from then on became the regular method of purported communication until 1934. Despite the individual that was the sleeping subject never officially being identified publicly, he has been described
as a hard-boiled businessman, member of the Board of Trade and Stock Exchange.
Dr. William Sadler developed his reputation with his community as being both a medical and paranormal figurehead that often debunked various forms of mysticism and psychic phenomenon. This reputation became popularized due to William's desire to want to host a forum of his former clients, since that sort of thing was accepted back then, way before HIPAA, to discuss a whole host of physical and mental health topics on Sunday afternoons. This small gathering quickly began growing in size, which was representative of many professional and socioeconomic backgrounds of local community members. As the weeks progressed and the group became larger, it is estimated that the group consisted of a minimum of 18 members, through vocational identification of these members mentioned in later reports. Dr. Sadler was eventually asked to give a series of talks on mental hygiene and psychic phenomenon during these meetings that began to grow in popularity throughout his career. In at least one of Dr. Sadler's published works, in the footnotes, Dr. Sadler indicated that with only 2 exceptions, that
all of the psychic phenomenon I've investigated have turned out to be either conscious or unconscious frauds. Some were deliberate frauds, others were those peculiar cases in which the performer was a victim of the deceptions of his own subconscious mind.
Found in the 1929 edition of his book, The Mind at Mischief, Tricks and Deceptions of the Subconscious and How to Cope with Them. The speculation that seems to fit surrounding these 2 unidentified individuals can be partially found in the appendix of The Mind at Mischief that indicated the first legitimate otherworldly experience was a deceased female, which appears to coincide with Ellen White, who was again that leader of the Adventist movement, and the second was reported by the noted science writer Martin Gardner, indicating in the Skeptical Inquirer that the former Urantia Brotherhood intimates informed him that William Kellogg, the nephew of the founder of the Kellogg Company that we all love, and was also William Sadler's brother-in-law, was in actuality the sleeping subject. Despite Dr. Sadler's extensive exposure surrounding mental and psychic phenomenon, after about 20 years of contact experience, an alleged student visitor speaking through the sleeping subject during one of their nocturnal vigils provided an answer to one of their questions, indicating,
If you only knew what you are in contact with, would you not ask such trivial questions? You would rather ask such questions as might elicit answers of supreme value to the human race.
Wilfred Kellogg was a close friend with Dr. William Sadler, that Chicago psychiatrist that started the Urantia Brotherhood, and who had a clear business interest in the publication of the text, as possibly evidenced by publication records retrieved online and letters discovered suggesting Kellogg's intimate dealings with the Urantia publication. Anna and Wilfred Kellogg, who were both first cousins, whose marriage made them close associates of the Sadler family. Sadler, Kellogg, their wives, and many of Kellogg's relatives had also been Seventh-day Adventists. This religious group was a sect that had a collection of revelations of its own in response to channeled messages by prophetess Ellen Goldwhite. Despite Dr. Sadler's clear following of this religious practice at one time, Dr. William Sadler appeared to be a practical man that cared about the well-being of his community, despite arguably some of his texts being hard to follow, and most certainly met the edge of taboo topics back during that time period, such as his living a sane sex life in 1938. One of his most well-known published works was on physical wellness that included the cause and cure of colds at Purdue University in 1930. The origins of the Urantia nightly vigils started as Sunday afternoon tea gatherings in the mid-1920s, which became known as the Forum. The Forum was a place where such topics like psychic phenomenon were examined and sometimes debated. In that time, the Forum came to be comprised of professional people, including doctors, lawyers, dentists, ministers, and teachers, along with individuals from all walks of life, which included housewives, secretaries, farmers, and common laborers, which is where my 18-plus number originally comes from. Dr. Sadler indicates two principles as to why this forum and sleeping subject were left to be a secret in 1960. The first reason was due to unknown features.
There is much connected with the appearance of the Urantia papers which no human being fully understands. None of us really knows just how this phenomenon was executed. There are numerous missing links in our understanding of how this revelation came to appear in written English. If any one of us should tell anyone all he really knows about the technique and methods employed throughout the years of our getting this revelation, such a narration would satisfy no one. There are too many missing links.
More precisely, as an example, most of what some would consider grammatical errors in the Urantia book had to do with British versus American nuances of the English language. As a brief example, the word percent is spelled as two words, as is common in the British version of the English language, versus Americans generally having it just be a single word. Consequently, such errors likely represent a poor understanding of American culture, along with more formal terms such as wherewith, that aren't typically used in casual literature. The purported second reason for remaining silent with the sleeping subject had to do with
the celestial revelators did not want any human being, any human name, ever to be associated with the Urantia book. They want this revelation to stand on its own declarations and teachings. They are determined that future generations shall have the book wholly free from all mortal connections. They do not want a St. Peter, St. Paul, Luther, Calvin, or Wesley. The book doesn't even bear the imprint of the printer who brought the book into being. Remember, you can appreciate a good poem even if you do not know the author. Likewise, you can enjoy a symphony even if you are ignorant of the composer.
However, despite all of this, I have my own theories surrounding the secrecy of the sleeping subject. Surrounding the amount of threats in various other forms of harassment an individual who received otherworldly messages would generate in the early 20th century, and hence the need for the sleeping subject's identity to remain elusive. Even now, when it comes to today's society, with much more open minds, I still get the occasional rebuke from a viewer with their own stark religious beliefs. Even today, with growing numbers of people believing in extraterrestrials, would I be leery of subjecting my own family to such a scenario if I was ever visited by such higher beings? This reality does not even represent malevolent intent of the group that made such a text, but rather a love for the human race, cherishing our own self-directedness, and of course, protection for the Kellogg family, if that was indeed the individual that was responsible for roughly half of the Urantia papers. It was even indicated that the publication of the Urantia book was postponed until the sleeping subject's death, which is the only major proverbial wrench in the Kellogg theory, with Wilfred's death occurring in August of 1956, not prior to 1955. It's most certainly true that several members of the forum group were potentially disillusioned members of the Seventh-day Adventists. A very rough and oversimplistic representation of Ellen White begins when she was 9 years old. At this time, she suffered a horrible and life-altering injury, being struck by a stone in the face, which encouraged Ellen towards turning to Jesus and their associated spiritual awakening. This awakening led to otherworldly messages and visions that tackled everything from philosophy, religion, and moral systems later on in their lives that directly inspired those around her. Eventually, members of the group began contesting some of their messages due to accusations of plagiarisms from several philosophical texts later in her career. I would imagine, just like today's Seekers of Truth, that people would turn to all sorts of relevant and even fraudulent sources towards their own journey associated with their own spiritual awakening. Whether fraud or profit, I'll save my rebuttal for the plagiarism section for my thoughts on all of this. I will also remind viewers that if Dr. Sadler and his team wanted to recreate the Adventist schema with another prophet such as Wilfred, I would imagine that they would have purposely done so, along with not delaying its publication by about 20 years. I believe that the fact that they purposely omitted such a name would speak volumes about the potential irrelevancy of the Adventist agenda. The Urantia book, in fact, can be viewed as a standalone religion in and of itself, despite the text not claiming to be a religion, majorly due to not offering direct rituals or practices to commune with God. Many platforms that attempt to discredit the Urantia book often describe the text as being cult-like or attempting to be dismissive of other world religions and races. After reading the text twice over, I can most certainly indicate that nothing, I mean absolutely nothing, could be further from the truth. In actuality, the text discourages forming a religion on that basis in order to encourage readers to find God through other religions, and most importantly, within themselves, through spiritual assets that are already guiding us, such as the adjutant mind spirits, the spirit of truth, and of course, that thought adjuster we were discussing earlier. All religious texts that believe in God contain at least some measure of truth or revelation about God. As for some examples of religious identifications in the Urantia book, let's examine Buddhism. The Urantia book claims that Buddhism, in its original form, is one of the best known religions without a God, which has arisen throughout all of evolutionary history on Urantia. Although admittedly, as this faith developed, it did develop some mindset of deity concept. For Judaic traditions, we learn that while Moses comprehended the more advanced Egyptian religious philosophy, and that the Bedouin slaves knew very little about such teachings, they had never entirely forgotten about the God on Mount Horeb, with whom their ancestors had called Yahweh. Consequently, in a myriad of ways, the text adds a great deal of historical Judaic, Islamic, Christian, Hindu, and other religious perspectives, rather than simply deposing them. When it comes to races, the life carers often speak of humans as though they were cattle and indicate that earlier stocks of the colored races had certain advantages. As an example, it is cited that Native Americans, or the red man, was a superior earlier stock that was superseded by the arrival of Adam and Eve, with their violet stock genes that resisted disease, or the human race progenitor, Fanta, who experienced non-painful childbirths. In totality, the desire and underlying theme for the text is for the assimilation of all races and cultures of the world, without excluding any one single race. Speaking of cultures, the Urantia book actually supports and endorses the Sacred Trinity from Catholicism, taking the concept of such a cosmic force a step further, giving a developed breadth of their continuous development onto such entities like master spirits, ancients of days, and paradise sons. Upon the death of Jesus Christ Michael, we learn of the Spirit of Truth, and that the Holy Spirit appears to be the child of the Infinite Spirit through Michael's consort, who is known as her local universe Mother Spirit, of whom Michael has declared to be his equal in every way. As for mythologies of the Nordic, Greek, and Egyptian traditions, are posited to be influenced surrounding the Lucifer rebellion, along with our fallen planetary prince, who is also most associated with the devil's corporeal staff, that were viewed as being superhuman, supporting the text's religious agenda. Suffice it to say, in the stories surrounding Jesus, that Jesus is portrayed as often viewing even prayer as artificial, encouraging his followers to have heartfelt conversations with their Heavenly Father, rather than insincere prayers or routines to gain the favor of God. After all, God loves all of his creation equally and is not a respecter of persons. People love a great conspiracy mystery that usually revolves around making a profit. At the time I'm making this video, the Catholic Church very roughly has estimated assets between a wide margin of $47 to $265 billion in assets around the world. The Urantia Foundation, or the creators of the Urantia Book, recently made around $2.7 million in 2023, mostly from revenue sales associated with their books. This whopping over 2,000-page text only retails online for around $5 if you receive the electronic Kindle version, or $21 if you want to punish yourself with the largest 3.5-pound index edition, for those of you looking to tone up. To make their business model even worse, it was determined that one of their copyrights for the Urantia Book expired in 1983, making the book easily accessible to pretty much anyone over the internet, if you so choose to bypass the Urantia Foundation entirely. To open this wound even further, the Urantia Foundation offers this very electronic text via audiobook and various study guides free of charge on their website. The written text can be found also free of charge in over 27 languages, likely shadowing where a great deal of these profits are being spent for people choosing to support the Urantia Foundation. Now, plagiarism is perhaps the hardest thing to explain here, and honestly, there's probably some truth to it, meaning that most critics most certainly have at least one leg to stand on. In fact, if you look closely enough, you will falsely see in the book references to scientific textbooks of that time that believed Mercury was tidally locked and didn't rotate, amongst other 20th century scientific inaccuracies. In defense of this, the book also made considerably more scientific discoveries than errors that you can see in my scientific discoveries video. Matthew Block has made considerable effort towards providing compelling paraphrasing and outright plagiarism citations surrounding the Urantia Book. Mr. Block has also done an excellent job finding most of William Sadler's published works that can be found at urantiabooksources.com. As of 1997, with the response I am providing, thanks to Urantia Book Sources, Mr. Block indicated that he was able to find 75 human works of interest that were representative of being possibly used in roughly 100 of the Urantia Book papers. It should also be known that Dr. William Sadler had been accused of borrowing without citing from sources surrounding their other published works historically. Again, to be honest, such a plagiarism claim is highly likely, as long as we view the text through a human perspective with Matthew Block's likely correct interpretation. However, the problem appears to be that many individuals who rebuke the Urantia Book has simply never read the entire 2,000 pages, and simply piggybacks off of some AI summary or plagiarism article without getting the full perspective and understanding of the text itself. If we read the Urantia Book, we then discover very quickly in the forward acknowledgement section that the midwares that created such a text indicated that
we are to be guided by the mandate of the superuniverse rulers, which directs that we shall, in all our efforts to reveal truth and coordinate essential knowledge, give preference to the highest existing human concepts pertaining to the subjects to be presented. We may resort to pure revelation only when the concept of presentation has had no adequate previous expression by the human mind.
These entities then proverbially bury themselves by saying,
We have selected as the basis of these papers more than 1,000 human concepts representing the highest and most advanced planetary knowledge of spiritual values and universe meanings.
So yes, it's highly likely that the book borrowed from human sources. It kind of almost says that itself. However, reading later pages of the Urantia Book further describes the mindset behind free and fully accessible knowledge. That as we progress throughout the universe, that information will be given to us free of charge and is generally accessible at any time. As we progress through the circuits, this information becomes easier and easier for us to obtain, being almost instantaneous once we reach the eternal Isle of Paradise. Copyright law and even basic human understanding might be a foreign construct to these entities that don't know us very well or most certainly do not think like us. In paper 10, we learn about the Trinity's attempt to escape personality absolutism when it states,
"The Trinity perfectly associates the limitless expression of God's infinite personal will and the absoluteness of deity, the eternal Son and the various sons of divine origin, together with the conjoint actor and his universe children, effectively provide for the Father's liberation from the limitations otherwise inherent in primary perfection, changelessness, eternity, universality, absoluteness, and infinity."
If you read the Urantia Book, you will quickly discover that humans are the lowest God-knowing creature, which hopefully says a lot about the human race. Hoarding or charging for information might seem like an alien pun rather than a real construct for them, much like a dog protecting a bone, citing our animalistic roots. Most religious texts have been most certainly passed down from human hands, and these book authors varies from paper to paper, with the entire book being approved by the judicial arm of the Ancients of Days, along with their acting planetary prince of Urantia, which is also known as the planet Earth. With that said, such a work is likely to breed similarities, and it's over 2,000 pages. What is more fascinating is how these entities were able to compile these works from 1911 to 1935, not forgetting that there was no internet back then. It should be reminded that the text was delivered in part using a student visitor midwire, or a spiritual being that is considered a small step higher than a human being in the Urantia Book, which can be prone to error, being cited in the text of many of their number, siding with the Lucifer Rebellion and the Declaration of Liberty, which is a topic I have for you in my Lucifer Rebellion video on the subject. So needless to say, this text has fallen through many hands, of whom may not have a full understanding of human culture or language. Again, this work is divinely inspired only. Although Urantia Book authors, like the Perfecters of Wisdom, are direct creations of the Paradise Trinity. In conclusion, even if you find this book to be one of the best literal works of science fiction to date, you must not deny the fact that many of its propositions in this text are spiritually and philosophically significant, resonating even with its critics. To say the very least, the short 31-ish year history of forming this text is simply something that's hard to believe, given that Dr. William Sadler, along with all those involved, would put so much resources into forming such a work for it to be the simple work of fiction, with no modus operandi, nor serious revenue generated by it. Especially as we consider their own busy careers and other published works that they were already working on. This all being a scam of conspiracy is simply improbable. However, this does not enhance the credibility of those higher entities that assisted in the creation of such a text. Verified by the Collective Conscious Raw and the Law of One, they indicated that the Urantia Papers was created by
a series of discarnate entities of your own earth planes, the so-called inner planes. This material is not passed by the council.
Even if such a book was not divinely inspired, can a person learn a great deal from what these semi-material beings have to offer? As we continue to speculate here, most secrets do not remain hidden for long, and I would expect at least one legitimate deathbed confession from at least one member of the inner circle by now. Despite the likelihood that something other than a human creature created the Urantia Book, was it a masterful myth that they decided we needed, or are we simply being over-enveloped by the mystery behind what we'll eventually learn to be science fact in the future? Thank you again for watching today's video, your continued support, and I'll see you on the next one.